Hello and welcome to whoever of you might be watching or listening to this conversation. My name is Dennis Kiley. I'm part of the Ecopsychology Initiative, and it is my great honor to have Rachel Nixon here, who I've recently got to know, and I've just felt this wonderful resonance with. Rachel is in Rockland, Maine. She has a community center called the Dancing Elephant that offers yoga and meditation and art and other community resources, not to mention she herself is a teacher. And I've just felt this wonderful alignment and synergy as I've gotten to know Rachel. I've had a chance to offer a program, The Nature of Resilience, through the Dancing Elephant, and was just humbled and inspired both to be invited, but also to get a sense of the community that Rachel and her community are putting together. And so I've invited her to be part of this conversation, and I've started calling them intimate ecopsychology. And I think the reasoning for that is because the intent is to drop in and to drop into our heart and our vulnerabilities and to have an intimate exchange. And the caveat to that I invite to others, and they seem more excited than I am, I keep getting nervous, is that it's unscripted, that there's no plan or fixed agenda. So I don't know what Rachel and I are going to talk about, but based on my previous connections with her, I'm excited to be in the unfolding and whatever might emerge. So without any further ado, Rachel, I'd love to just welcome you in and share however you'd like to begin.
Thank you, Dennis, so much. Such a delight to have this time to share conversation, and the spontaneity of it all really feels inspiring to me. So thank you. And I was out in nature this morning with our puppy, and I was looking forward to connecting and thought I wanted to share a little bit about some of the honorings that we have been working with in our community center, and as a way to start our conversation and maybe see where it takes us. So really a deep bow to Sebene Selassie, who's a teacher in the Insight Meditation Society, Theravadan Buddhist community. And she recently wrote a book called You Belong. And a big part of this exploration is inviting all of us into a process of honoring. So in really listening and receiving her encouragement, there are three honorings I'd love to start with this morning.
Please do.
Yeah, and the first is, it's all about slowing down, and the first honoring is really slowing down and noticing the land that we're sitting on as we're talking here this morning, Dennis. I'm looking out the window and seeing trees in our yard and hearing birds, and really pausing and reflecting on all those who have come before as stewards of this land. And I'm sitting on the shores of Penobscot Bay in Camden this morning. And I would like to honor the Penobscot Nation, which is part of the Wabanaki Confederacy, the indigenous peoples who were here thousands of years ago, taking care of this place, and really affirming their inherent sovereignty of this land and this place, and appreciating that whatever I can do in my lifetime to continue to steward the lands feels like an important thread to continue. And the second honoring is honoring spiritual lineage. And for each of us, that can feel really different. We may have grown up in different religions or spiritual traditions. So I would like to honor just my own receiving of teachings from particularly yoga teachers that have a connection back to the lineage of Kripalu in India, Swami Kripalu, and also Tibetan Buddhist teachers, all the way back. Pema Chodron is a wonderful teacher of mine, all the way back to the Buddha. So again, an opportunity to slow down and realize, like, thousands of years of teachings before me, and I am sitting here recognizing, like, I received these teachings from the East, and really bowing to all the Asian teachers that have come before and that are currently continuing to share these teachings from Asia. Feels just really roots me into myself and in appreciation. And then the last is an appreciation for ancestors, that we all have our people and have a history and stories, and just the importance of honoring where we've come from. And in all of these honorings, ancestors included, recognizing that there's both really perhaps beautiful memories, and then there's also maybe a shadow or a darkness to some of the stories of the indigenous people or our ancestors, or how spiritual lineages have come down. So in doing the honorings, it's not just a nicety, it's really honoring that we're here today because of how humanity has unfolded before us, and really honoring all parts of the experience. So I wanted to start with that because it feels connected to ecopsychology, this practice that I've been doing with Dennis, and also the practice in our community center of really connecting through the practices that came from Asia. So, yeah.
Rachel, thank you for doing that. And one, I have found through personal experience, not to mention just now, that you have integrated and embodied these honorings in a way that feel really genuine and sincere. And I think that is to be really candid, I'm in my own process of how to do that. And and it feels so important, both like in theory and in practice, and from the essence of my being, I want to honor and give thanks to all those to whom I'm indebted, those I know and those I don't, those that are present, those of the past. And I'm still trying to figure out what that looks like and how to do it in a way that is truthful and helpful and appropriate. And I just am inspired by you, because I can tell, and through our conversations, I know that you've been in your own process. And you mentioned Sebene Selassie and her work, and that I've read a little bit, and it feels very resonant. And so I'm grateful to have people close to me who are peers, but are also leaders and teachers, and who can model for me. And I just want to thank you for offering that, not only to me, but for our community, because I think it's really valuable for whatever we're wanting, whether it's just personal growth, or to address the climate crisis, or to rectify egregious injustices that have been committed to people and cultures across time, that we need to honor. And so I guess I'm just grateful for the modeling that you're offering of that. And while we're on it, what has been your process like to come into a way of honoring that feels so truthful?
Yeah. Well, I so resonate with the word process, and our community recently, we offered a book group of Sebene Selassie's book, You Belong. So we entered a process with a group of people from all over the world, as far away as Tasmania. The class was 6 weeks, and each of the first 3 weeks, we took one of the honorings and we broke it down, and we did self-reflection and exploration to invite everyone to have a personal connection, and to write and reflect and talk in breakout groups. So, it's really important, as you mentioned, to take the time and create an authentic way of relating with and honoring. And one of the things we did was listen to the WERU program, Dawland Signals, and 2 members of the Wabanaki Confederacy led a program, and they invited all these really wonderful speakers to join them about land acknowledgements, and how the whole spectrum, there are some that are so deeply personal and so considered, and then there are others that are like, here's the basic language, plug in your local indigenous tribe and feel good about it because you're saying something. So it was an hour, they really explored how to, just as you're saying, make it personal and make it real, and that it's that it's not a statement, it's embodying, as you're saying, embodying a sense of connecting with place and history that's authentic. And there's a big part in that program saying it's really about relationship. So this fall, I've invited Wabanaki-REACH to come do 2 programs at the Dancing Elephant. So instead of just saying, oh, we feel good because we're saying this, no, it's like, what can we do to further our knowledge and to be in relationship and right relationship with the land and with the people who are still stewarding the lands. And honestly, you know, whether it's the ancient spiritual lineages or the ancient indigenous wisdom, I mean, it's so clear that we've come to this time of reckoning where we need to circle back to those ways of being, so that I feel like anything I can do truly as a person to be in relationship with that way of being feels like a genuine way in my life to honor and learn from the wisdom that really was sustainable. And I mean, that word is thrown around, but was really life-giving and life-affirming. So that's a little bit about how we did it in the group. And I have a group of wonderful, inspiring people who are, you know, supporting the Dancing Elephant. So we came up with language we felt comfortable, you know, which is now on our website, just sort of, so as people enter our community, they see that this is something that we really are working with, and it's a process. So yeah, thank you for asking. Yeah, and I'm curious about your journey with it, and it does take time, and yeah, I would just offer, you know, if there's anything I can do to support that. I think it's a ongoing exploration. I feel like I'm at the beginning. And then sharing the honorings, those were just what arose this morning.
Yeah, thank you for just sharing more about the process, your invitation to be of support. As you know from yoga in the Yoga Sutras, the first reference is, and now the inquiry of yoga, Atta Yoga Nushasanam. And I think I'm very much in my inquiry, and for better and worse, I think I'm hesitant to make offerings and make explicit until I feel that clarity. And yet I know that the soils are being churned, and I feel committed to my process of learning. And you know, it's interesting as you were talking, and something that I think feels really important to me, and one of the reasons I respect you is, even though we might hold these roles of a teacher or a community center leader or whatever, in whatever capacities I hold roles with the Ecopsychology Initiative and otherwise, like, I feel so committed that I am remaining, one, humble. And I think that's part of what you're talking about with these honorings and our offerings of gratitude and respect to, whether it's cultures or communities or practices, insofar as that we're staying humble, that we stand on the shoulders of giants. And sometimes those shoulders we're standing on, we're subjugated and treated with, you know, in appalling fashion, and really exploited, extracted, as much characterizes a lot of Western industrial culture. And so I guess I'm aware of wanting to stay humble, but also both out of intent, but also necessity. Life seems to ensure that I need to keep learning, and that we never get there. And I was thinking of late, those who've known me, ever since I was a young kid, my father gave me a book called The Man Who Planted Trees. It was about this man in a rural countryside, World War II, who came upon the shepherd who was tending his flock of sheep, but was always planting seeds for trees. And then the man, the narrator, came back years later and found these forests. And I was so inspired by that notion that we, in our own humble, simple way, can plant these seeds and tend them. And we may see, some may grow, some may not, some may die, but that we're continually making these offerings. And so I share that as a precursor because I have saved acorns, and maybe not as much now, but for years I would save anywhere I found acorns and see if I could get them to germinate and plant. And then that was, you know, up until, I mean, I still do it some, but not as much, because in the last decade I've been committed to fruit trees. And I love fruit trees. I have my plot of land that is as packed full of fruit trees as possible. And I had this moment where I can't count the hundreds of hours that I get up before my kids early so I can water the trees or tend to them. And in the last week, two things have happened. One, I've realized this preponderance of the brown-tailed moth is just sweeping through the coast of Maine, and pretty much everyone I know has had a outbreak of like acute scratching and itching and pain and discomfort. My son and I have been lucky not to, knock on wood. But all that is to say is that I've realized that brown-tailed moths love oak trees and fruit trees. And I was like, of course. And then recently walking around, looking at my trees and talking to them and seeing that despite all these efforts, they're not really bearing fruit in a way that one would hope or expect. And I had this moment of realizing, and it was akin in a lot of other ways of like, oh, I need to learn. I have thought I understood enough, but I need to like re-humble myself to go back to being a student. And I think that is true in a lot of areas, whether it's with the honorings and how to show up as the best servant I can be. So anyway, I guess as I'm talking through this, I'm wondering, you play the role of a leader, a community member, as well as a teacher and otherwise. Like, what role does learning and humility play for you?
I love the word humility. Yeah, it feels really, well, hearing you talk about the brown-tailed moths and I was thinking about the ticks because I've had Lyme disease. I think first of what can we learn from the outer world? And I feel like I've been in a huge process of learning of how to restore balance and health to my own body through the Lyme disease. And I feel like we are nature. So as a teacher, as a person who holds space, like there's this inherent sense of learning about our nature, our human nature, our internal, our external worlds. And that is such a process that's unfolding that you never could teach in a way where you knew everything or, so I feel like I really guided myself through healing with my practices. And I really didn't know how I was going to heal. It was really quite remarkable. And so I think of people who come into our space looking for connection and belonging and healing. And my aspiration is just to be me and to offer humbly what I have received from other teachers, that I feel like a true sense that this is something that has touched me. So I feel comfortable sharing it and offering it. And that it's a really remarkable space to be in, to almost like, I pretty much start every yoga class by saying your body is your guide. And so there's a sense of inviting, in the physical practice of yoga, students into a relationship to feel and to slow down enough to have a physical practice that's not an extra Western, that's not striving and trying to improve or get fit and so it's really interesting. It's so countercultural to invite people into space to slow down enough to have an embodied practice. I feel it's really about languaging and being very spacious and welcoming and inviting people into a space of self-acceptance. So I appreciate the sense of my learning and being a beginner all these years. Like, it's like, that's kind of interesting. Let's try that, and really bowing to and honoring, that these ancient teachings really, it's very different how we practice in the West. It's not a typical, usually practice in groups in a yoga class in the East. So it's a really It's a very, it takes a lot of humility to understand that I'm representing a tradition of teachings, and in the West, it looks very different. So I try my best to be as, in the word now is decolonized, as non-Western in terms of like, it's all by donation. It's an invitation to be in your body, to see what arises, and to help create an energy that can actually collectively support our healing, you know, individually and as a whole. Because I mean, it's great that yoga is everywhere. There's so many benefits, but it's become an industry. And I bow humbly to the gentleness and the softness of embodied practice. And you know, thinking of my meditation experience, I mean, there's nothing more than having beginner's mind. And the Buddha said, you know, don't take what I am teaching you as the truth. Find out what's true for you. So, you know, I'm guessing that if you came to a class, you would feel invited into a space where your body was going to guide you or sit with you, and that you would be in relationship to what was happening internally and in connection also with the space around you. And that kind of circles back to the outer world. I do a lot of retreats out in nature in the summer. And again, humility and humble and bowing to Mother Earth. Yeah, so that's what's coming up for me. I feel that is really, I don't take it lightly that I am offering teachings from different cultures across the planet. And I feel such respect for all that have come before me to allow me to do this, because I feel like what I hear from people is that it really is what's needed now. So I bow to receiving this, you know, this sense of inner inquiry and inner curiosity that's inviting others into that space.
Yeah, Rachel, that's beautifully said, that to be in the role of a teacher is such an honor, and that it is, yeah, to come back to that word humility, I feel so humbled that I can sit in the seat. And yet part of our ecotherapy training right now, and I talk about it, like, we are not the healers. We can create and support the conditions and facilitate people being in touch with their own innate healing forces, but healing happens. And the greatest healer and the greatest teacher, as I sometimes have said in my yoga classes, is on your mat. And the extent that I am of service is hopefully just being a mirror and pointing you back to your wisdom. And I think of one of my favorite books is the Dao of Leadership, which talks about that the leader that's like the top-down hierarchical, you do this, that's maybe not the model of leadership that I want, even though I think it's very prevalent in our culture, as opposed to how can I be of service? And maybe the greatest service I can is bringing people together to find their, whether individually or collectively, to find their own knowing and to trust that. And so sometimes I think my role is just to be a cheerleader of like, go you know, listen to what your instinct says and trust that. And in the process, it's emergence insofar as we learn a little bit more than we did the day before. And I think one of the things that's helped me feel compassionate and empathic for others is what, and I don't remember the teacher, and many have said it, is people do the best they can with the awareness they have. And so to really be respectful that people are showing up to get their needs met, trying to do their best. I really believe most everyone is good at heart. And so they're doing what they can. And sometimes that leads to some atrocities and horrific behaviors. But if I in some way can help that person expand their awareness so that they can learn a little more, and not just learn more about, oh, this practice or this is this wonderful quality, but also learn more about their shadow, as you alluded to, like learn more about the darkness, and whether that's our own intrapersonal darkness or the darkness and shadow that might characterize our community, our culture, our country. I mean, I think that is so powerful, and that's the greatest gift that I can offer. And you mentioned how the Buddha spoke about beginner's mind, and some of my favorite Buddhist teachers talk about how we never really get there. We're always hopefully trying to abide in the beginner's mind. And reminds me of T.S. Eliot's quote, who said, "At the end of our journeying will be to return to where we began and see with new eyes."
Oh, I love that. I love that. Yeah, thank you for sharing. I it really resonates. And I love that we share the yoga teaching and the connections of practice and nature. And yeah, what was coming up for me is the sense of how to both in yoga practice, there's a beautiful teacher, Michelle Cassandra Johnson, and she's a leader in the movement of bringing social justice into the practice of yoga, and basically says, how can you practice yoga and not work with issues of social justice? Because it's in our bodies. We are living in a time of intense social change and disruption. And so as you were speaking, it's so interesting to me is how to work with my own shadows, my own questions about what has brought me to this point, and how I relate to social justice issues, and how to not turn away, but to also be in inquiry and not in despair. And I think when people come to practice, a lot can come up, especially if they're new to practice, that's been inside. And whether it's internal or external, there's so much grief in the world that's not processed. There's so much conflict in the world that's not processed. And like, think of this last year and a half. It's like, now that we're feeling somewhat better here in our place on the planet, one of my friends who's in a social work program said, well, when you start feeling safe again is when you start to process the grief. So it's really fascinating to me, like the next 6 months to a year, like not bypassing that, like we're in a big mess, not be despairing, but also being really real of like what's moving through us, and how to not just come to a yoga practice or a meditation in some la land, but how to balance like finding joy and true joy and presence and connection, and how to kind of reckon with what is true in this lifetime, in this generation that we're living in. And so I find it really really exciting that there are a lot of leaders that I look to as mentors that are leading social justice work into the teaching of yoga and meditation, because it is the experience of being human right now. And so I just offer that as you were again talking about shadows and how we show up for people. It's really quite interesting. And then in this last group, I mean, I would say the sense of when you invite someone into a space where they might learn something that they didn't know, that is truly deeply sad. Like, I'm trusting that that is a space that is about healing, and whether it's about the environment or about our relationship to indigenous lands and peoples, or so it's very brave to practice in this way and not shy away and not say, oh, this is a yoga or a meditation class to release general stress, which is also good. But this is actually a practice about being human in this time, not separate from the life, but in this life, in relationship. And I really appreciate your work and the sense of the parallel there of how to be both in celebration of the that we are nature and that the natural world is such a place of healing, and how to be in honest relationship with the state of our us. We are this issue of what's crying out for help, you know. So I've really appreciated learning so much from everyone in the groups that I've been in with you, because it's a balancing act, how to balance despair and help make change, help be in the world in a way that is life-giving, as I mentioned, life-giving or life-affirming. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so beautifully said. And I'm just grateful to know you and know that you're out there with your expression and your offerings. And as you were talking, I was like, one more occasion about the both and, insofar as I think our practice may expand the container that we can hold it all. And part of that all is the joy and the gratitude and the love, and it's all sacred and beautiful. And there is extraordinary suffering and pain and injustice and heartache and grief and loss that's out there. And I think the practices that we are needing, the traditions that are calling of us, are ones that they don't have to, but the ones that I'm interested in are ones that help us to be with both. And to see how I, through my work, hopefully can be more of a servant to the world and bring betterment, and to own the places where I am either embodying and or perpetuating part of the shadow and the struggle that I might not be aware of. And I think so many people can be, through very good intentions, like, I want to go save the world. And yet I think it first has to start with ourselves, and to see, like, where might I be part of the problem, so to speak. And I think that's really difficult. And to think about a role as a teacher, like, you might not get more students, and you probably won't get more Instagram and Facebook followers and like more money or whatever it is by promoting like doing the hard work, right? And yet I think it's so foundational and important. And was talking about recently in our ecotherapy training that I hope people's goal is just not to make sure that everyone has a perfect, wonderful, happy time all the time, because though there is a value in that, if we don't dig into our own shadow, if we don't support others in doing that, then I think a lot of the issues that have been perpetuated for hundreds and thousands of years can continue to be so. And yet when we do that work, then I think we can go forward in a way to truly be of service qualitatively in a different capacity that hopefully generates a lot more of the healing in the change that we're needing, as opposed to just kind of like the topical covering that like looks pretty. Mm-hmm. And I think of, for example, mindfulness, like it's this catch-all in the tech world and the corporate world of like, oh, embrace mindfulness and you're going to be a better leader. But I'm not always sure that the way that mindfulness and these practices are, dare I say, being co-opted. I don't know that that was the original intent. And I don't know that it is having the real benefit, or it may be the full capacity. Having said that, my first yoga teacher in Hawaii, a woman named Kathy Elder, just said, if you get people to the mat, if you get them to their cushion, you've done a great service. And that to not assume what they need or that you have to deliver it. And so I guess there's another both and of, I hope to offer people those experiences that can be transformative. And I want to let go of my agenda or notion that I know what you need or how it should look.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's really important. And there was something you were sharing a little while back, then I got really involved in what you were just saying. Well, let me just speak to that, which is, we were talking about this last week in the ecotherapy training about getting out of the way and letting nature do the work. It's the same sort of feeling of like, yeah, if people arrive and get to a cushion or a mat, it's like offering humbly just enough and then getting out of the way. And I always say to whoever's in the room, I love looking up and seeing people do different things, because that means they're listening to their body. If I look up and everyone's following along. So I've been using a lot of language lately about creative, you know, languaging about what does your body need. And not that I haven't before, but I now see everyone doing something different. And I feel like I've actually invited them into their body. And so that I don't know what they need. How would I ever know what they need? And that's really, really profound. That's really profound. And it's not, I'm teaching you, it's like I'm providing an experience where you can get in touch with what might be arising in your body or in your heart today or in your mind. And yeah,
when
that,
we're no longer needed, that is a sign that we've done it well.
yeah, right? So true, so true. Yeah. And I appreciate what you said about the social justice work, because like I've sort of trusted from the beginning of just offering in a way that feels true to who I am and holding something bigger about what the ancient teachings really can help us discover in this time. And that really takes a lot of trust in not trying to please what, you know, whatever mainstream industry, McMindfulness or yoga industry. It's like, that's not who I am anyways, but it does take a lot of courage to be like, oh, I'm going to bring these big topics in and see what happens, you know? And that's, I would say in this last group of the You Belong book, there's a whole subchapter, and we read it aloud together, on whiteness and white supremacy. And it was the most beautiful, present, hard, real conversation. And someone used the word squirming, you know, like we were all squirming. And she said, you know, we should be squirming every day and taking care of ourselves. So there's like, I really appreciated that. Like, it's really uncomfortable, but if we don't do that uncomfortable work, then what does that mean for future generations?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
and I think of, you know, when I first started, I came to yoga after I came to meditation. I was about 18 when I started meditating. And, you know, the truth be told is I was interested in transcendence. I wanted to like bypass all the icky and the yucky. I wanted perfection and sunshine and rainbows. I was also kind of, my ego was like, I would love it if people thought that I was really enlightened. And like, and so I think a lot of people are initially brought to these practices of like, oh, I don't want to feel my own ickiness, and I don't want to feel the squirm about social justice and racism and white supremacy and that. So like, oh, if I just do enough yoga and meditation, maybe I can transcend all of that. And that, to me, obviously is not the full complete picture, and not even that I would want transcendence now. Not to mention, I realize that I don't know that you ever really get it if you're committed to the practice. But I think there's also another aspect that maybe I was indirectly referencing with kind of the corporate tech embrace of mindfulness, is also insofar as like it's another way of acquiring power. And that can be very subtle and unconscious. And I don't think I was as aware of it, but really needing to realize that the more I built my own container and the more that I felt and received the benefits of these practices, like there was a way that I was acquiring more power and agency. And that's especially problematic as like a white heterosexual, you know, financially comfortable man. Like there is a way that like that can be really dangerous. And so I think receiving is so important, but the other half to complete the cycle and the circle is service. Mm-hmm. And serve from a place of humility, not like, oh, I'm going to look down on you and give you crumbs. But, and I think in our day and age, that service necessitates really embracing racism and white supremacy and social justice and all these things. And I think when we can do that, when we bring our yoga and meditation into the world in that way, to me, it just feels better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you just reminded me of what I really connected with earlier, which was our unconscious bias and what we don't even know. and to have the humility to sit with ourselves, and to be vulnerable with people in spaces that we're holding, and to sort of share. This is all a process of uncovering what we don't even see. How are we perpetuating things by just living our lives? You really have to slow down enough and take the time to be curious, and not to be judgmental, but to be like, oh, that's really good to see. Now I have an awareness I didn't have. And that's that, the non-egoic, or you see, you're not trying to be some great teacher holding space, having it all figured out, but saying to people like, I'm right here with you, and that's, I think, I don't know, it feels like this time in our collective history is like everything's coming to the surface. And if we're willing to look at it internally and externally, there's so much wisdom. And if we see it as an opportunity rather than as like, oh gosh, this is so depressing, then there's some energy that can come to that collective healing and internal healing. And that there are a lot of great teachers now that are working on intergenerational trauma and how to heal the trauma that has been carried years and years and down the line, and to do it in an embodied way, that this body could actually now pass on to the next generation a different kind of energy and genetics. That's really powerful. And that takes healing in a way and working in an embodied way that could actually, at a cellular level, rewrite the story that's going to be passed down. That's nature at its best.
That is evolution.
Woo! That's so
That's
cool.
what we need. And I think, I don't know to what extent you would agree with this, but I think there's a lot of people who've maybe been resistant to some of like the BIPOC movements and anti-racism and otherwise from their own places of fear and shame. And so to me, one of the ways that I think for my own benefit, and not that it's about like, I want to do this to help others only, because it really has to start with me. But one of the things that I think served me and hopefully then can be some gift to others is to model being with my own vulnerability and to be with my own fear and shame of like, if I do open this door of awareness, what's going to happen? And I don't know. And that uncertainty, I think, can be really terrifying for people, because, I think existentially just showing up as a human in this world is really hard. And so I think to the extent that we can give experiences to people that invite them into their vulnerability and uncertainty in a way that's safe, and to show that like, actually it can become, and I use this in a different way, but it can become your power, that you can show up and that you're not scared to meet someone different than you. You don't feel ashamed to acknowledge past injustices. That to me is the healing that I want to be a part of.
Well said. So, so, so important to model that vulnerability and to be wherever we are on our path and are willing to open up our own exploration. It just really, and the word you use, power, empower, to keep all of us in that space of like empowered learning and not going, ugh, but being like curious and to feeling the sadness and the grief, but to continue forward, to explore and to be in relationship in different ways. That vulnerability is the key. And I feel like in the meditation and yoga, I mean, I've done it in the women's circle, in the yoga women's circle, we do touch into really deep issues. And what I feel like for both the meditation and the yoga, that having the embodied practice, having to work some really sensitive or vulnerable considerations in our life, to then dance or to then sit together and do a grounding body scan. It's like you can offer the nervous system something to sort of explore that might be a little scary and terrifying, and then you can ground. So it feels to me like it's very natural to work with what's real in our world with embodied practice at the same time. And that's where the art, I find, I mean, art and nature, like, is who I am. So in bringing the art piece, and we just did a 6-week in-person art exploration, it is the nonverbal. It is that we don't have to sit around and talk about all of these things to figure it out. We can move in our body, we can create art, we can free write, and offering people that nonverbal. We're not sitting here trying to intellectualize and figure out a way to heal the whole world. We're just meeting ourselves where we are. And it's pretty amazing when people are just in a space of being in their energy. And so I personally think the art is a big part of this, as giving people another nonverbal tool to explore and not make art, but just process and move energy and heal in a way that is, yeah, it's just, and it's countercultural, because, you know, the first class, half the people say, I don't know about this. I don't think I can make any art. And then by the second class, they're like, give me more.
Yeah, I'm one of those, to be
like
really
a kid, right? It's like,
growing up, I was all about like, what am I good at? And that's the lane I'm staying in. And so music and art and dance, like that was not me. I was going to do sports. I was doing academics, like those I had. And, you know, it's taken me a really long time, in part to go into my own vulnerability and my own shame to be able to even step my foot in that door. And yet it's been so liberating. And so, you know, 2 anecdotes of that. One is, I love to dance, but I was always so embarrassed or thinking that I couldn't dance. So I wouldn't dance, or I just do the, you know, a little of this on the sidelines. And it's been so liberating. And that, I think, is an important word that we all need. Is it has been liberating for me to say that, like, I don't just have to do yoga and play sports and do those physical activities. Like, I can also dance, and I love it. And what a joyous, blessed experience for me. And so now we have nightly, with our family, we have nightly dances after dinner. And it's been so fun to share that with my kids and to see that come online. And then conversely, I have to admit, I've been very delayed coming to art. I would like collaging, or I doodle, but my kids love art. And so just in terms of like joining them, they've given me the permission, which I think is another valuable word. They've given me the permission towards that creativity and expression, which you said isn't about like some outcome, as it is just merely a meeting of the moment and allowing it to express us. And so it's awesome.
yeah. Yeah. And I'm so glad you used the word liberation at this point in our conversation, because that word has come up in the last couple of weeks in our practice spaces. And to hear it come through the voice of a student of mine who actually was involved in starting the Dancing Elephant, and she part of her career was writing children's books and illustrating them as well. And about 3 years ago, she had a stroke. Yeah. And I visited her in rehab and brought some of Pema's writings, and we read. And so she called me up like 6 weeks ago. She had saw the announcement of the Yoga and Art Circle, and she said, I'd like to come. And I was like, great. So here she says, I've been a kid for the last 3 years, relearning everything. And at the last class, she said, I feel liberated from this art and this movement and this dance. I was like, oh, it was so moving to have such a powerful word be spoken. Yeah. And yeah, liberation. It's, yeah.
Yeah, I think we all have these unique seeds that we can plant with our lives that fully actualize and manifest into our abundance and highest best selves. And yet I think both innately through psychology and conditioning and culture and all this, we end up quite restricted. And the chains that hold us back consciously and unconsciously, practically and internally. And so I mean, what more could you want for someone than they find liberation? And or what better compliment could you get that someone says through an experience with you that they find that liberation? Because then all of a sudden we are unfettered to manifest into our fullest actualization. And I think the world needs that. And when I think a lot of the harms that have been happening are not coming from our liberated self. They are coming from the parts of us that are scared and restricted and in chains.
Yeah.
And I wonder what you think about the notion that sometimes the first step has to be a permission. And that permission can be a teacher or a friend or a therapist, like just affirming, keep going, you can do this. It sometimes can be an extraordinary disruption in someone's life. So let's say having a stroke and no longer, it has to be a new normal. And that new normal almost necessitates a permission to show up differently. But I've found consistently that permission has to be part of that process before we get to the freedom.
Yeah, that's a wonderful word. Permission. I heard that word used by a teacher co-teaching with Sebene, Selassie. His name is Yang. And he said, give yourself permission to slow down. Give yourself permission to be here. Not just slow down and be in the present moment. It's like, just take a moment and give yourself permission to slow down. Yeah. So hearing you say that, and it really, because I was sort of in his guided practice, I was like, oh, wow, that's so, wow, can we give ourselves permission? And when we do, what can happen? Yeah. So that is a powerful, it's amazing how words, and I am really careful with words in the really honoring trauma sensitive and not knowing what I might have been saying before was actually triggering, so I'm very attuned to words, and I feel like the permission word is so, it's like the entry into a practice of then the possibility of some small liberation or some big liberation, right? Yeah. Permission. That's a great, and an invitation. I think that's a word that's, I'm not, whether you're in nature or in a meditation practice or art, it's like, this is just an invitation. You can do with it whatever you'd like.
Yeah.
It's not like I'm telling you to do this with your body or to do this with your paintbrush or sitting on your cushion. What works for you? What does your body need right now? What does your heart need? And that, I think in this culture, really looking at our language and how language can subtly perpetuate old ways of being. And you used the word earlier when we were talking emergent, and I've heard you use that word before. I think the sense that we're all emerging in this time together, and what ways do we hold space that can allow that emergence to just continue in a way that can be liberating. And that to me is, I love the word emerging, right?
I'm glad you do. I do too, obviously.
It's like emerging. Oh yeah, we're emerging. We're not going anywhere. We're just emerging, right? It's so not goal oriented. It's just, right. Yeah.
Well, I remember in my, but in the studio that I worked in, the yoga and meditation studio, there was a kind of banner that you sometimes see, and it said, we must be willing to let go of the life that we imagined to live the life that was meant for us. And I think so often we have our plans and our ideas, and I'm going to control this, and it has to be this way, and attached to our, many attachments and desires. And I think that is the antithesis of emergence. And it often either doesn't get us where we wanted and we're really disappointed. It gets us exactly where we thought we wanted, and it probably wasn't what we needed or wanted. Whereas emergence is like allowing the wisdom and the current to take us where we need to go. And yet that necessitates such a letting go that is so hard. And as someone who is a perfectionist and a planner, that's been really hard. And yet, talk about liberating. The more I've embraced emergence, it's, oh, why would you do it any other way? Because it's so much less effort. It's joyous. It's collaborative with either other people or the natural world or just life itself. And I've never ended up in an outcome that I didn't think was just as it meant to be, and something so poignant and beautiful.
Yeah. Have you read Emergent Strategy by Adrienne?
I've read, my wife has read it, and I've read parts of it, and we've had a lot of conversations about it. And I now just need to steal it from her bedside table.
Well, it's so beautiful that these themes we're talking about are really being expressed by many people, and even though it's still countercultural, it's creating this upspring of energy around co-creating and emerging and slow and staying open to go where the winds take us. And that, I just as you described that, it's and being similar to you, always looking back like planner, accomplish, do all the work, and now it's like the end of Sebene's book. She's like, I dare you, cancel things, slow down, so I was like, literally that day I went on the studio schedule and I'm like, I'm taking 2 weeks off, the last week in August, the first week in September, and I'm canceling these 2 summer programs. It was so liberating because all that planning and scheduling was getting in my own way. And we have to, when we can, dare to slow down and trust that we will be okay if we do less.
Right.
Like that takes a lot of courage.
I'm glad you said that. And you'd said it earlier in the talk, and there were so many other things that I was pinging you with. But I think you're 100% right, that it is so much about courage and bravery to dare, to show up, to do differently, to be poignantly impact. I mean, the list goes on. I think and that's a different model of courage than a lot of what our culture holds, which is like power and fight through fear. And you see a foe and you conquest them with such courage. And I think this expression of courage is no less powerful. It's perhaps just as needed, but it is a radical act.
Totally. Yeah. So radical. And to feel that courage as an expression of vulnerability and taking a risk or doing something differently, stepping out of what has been a way of being in mainstream, which is going one way, and saying, I'm going over here. Yeah. That's huge, that's huge. And I, living with my partner, Aaron, and his 2 daughters growing up, 12 and 14, in this culture that's going, so fast.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my goodness, so how to, really in parenting and in teaching and having the courage to be countercultural and to say, well, actually, we as a family can do this our way, and that's okay. Yeah. It's such a big, beautiful, invitation to trust in our own path and trust in our own expression of self in this lifetime, and notice when we are getting pulled back in and saying, okay, I see it happening. And that feels to me like a huge gift to the others that I'm in relationship with now. Is I got a newsletter from Wabanaki-REACH, kind of full circle from where we started. And it was, dear friends, we are closing the office in July. There will be no Zoom meetings, no Zoom calls. We are supporting our staff and volunteers to enjoy time with their families, with themselves, with their friends, with nature. And I was like, thank you. You know?
Yep.
And
I got
that's
the same email, and I was
right?
like, yes.
Yes.
And then there's this way, it reminds me of the Marianne Williamson quote, that when we exist in our light, we give others the permission to do the same.
Right? That was it. It was permission. I was like, okay, that also contributed to my 2 weeks off. And it's like, thank you for modeling what we all need. No more Zoom calls, as wonderful as Zoom has been.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Speaking of thank you and modeling and sharing gifts, I am feeling really honored and grateful that, well, one, that you just shared and brought yourself forward, but that I got to connect with you and yeah, to just share in this meeting and deepening. And I'm so humbled by it and inspired. And I would like to see if you had any final thoughts, and also just extend an invitation. If you have any resources related to what we've talked about today, please pass those along. And I think the rest of the community would benefit from that. But yeah, before passing it on to you, I just want to take a moment and just feel the fullness. And I will close with a slight anecdote talking about coming around full circle about my fruit trees. I spoke with the Maine Cooperative Extension, and I was saying, like, I have all these trees that in the spring are just like absolutely extraordinary flowering, but they're not always necessarily fruiting. The woman said, you need more different varieties. There needs to be more of that pollination. And so I am in this moment just feeling really humbled at the pollination that happened when you and I got to come together. That was only possible, I think, from each of us showing up so fully. So thank you very much. And I have no doubt that it will continue to bear fruit in me, and hopefully for anyone who watches this.
I love that connection to your fruit trees and that invitation for different varieties, different voices, different yeah, when we celebrate our own uniqueness and share in conversation with someone else, I feel very warm-hearted and full of energy and inspiration, and just deep bow to all that you offer to the world. And my little puppy is like right here. Yeah, just really this model of having conversations is I think really needed in the world, and appreciating your invitation and your just presence and listening and picking up on things that I was sharing, and just hold a lot of appreciation for you in this moment. Yeah.
Well, and I go forward knowing, one, nobody contact Rachel between the end of August and beginning of September. Having said that, do you want to just say anything about how people can find out more about either you or the studio or the community center,
Sure.
upcoming offerings? And you can either say that now or we can put it in the notes, but I have no doubt that people, to the extent if they listen or watch this, will want to know more.
Well, that's a great, very generous invitation. Yeah. And actually the last weekend in August, kicking off my 2 weeks off, will be a 3-day retreat on Hurricane Island, which is, yeah. So certainly with Zoom, or people who live within distance of the mid-coast of Maine, our community center is in downtown Rockland, and we're just slowly reopening. We're doing lots of summer programs outside. So yeah, the magic of the web and connecting, it's very easy. rocklandyoga.com, and just welcome you to connect in any way that works for you. We will be having both Zoom and in-person offerings for the who knows, as long as we might imagine. And so grateful that Dennis has offered a program, and hopefully will offer again. And we are really all about, as we were just sharing, different voices and different ways for people to connect and learn and be together. So, yeah.
Well, here's some more pollination that you're offering, and between us and all points in between. And again, Rachel, my heartfelt gratitude. Yeah, deep thanks.
You're so welcome. Thank you. Thank you.
Be well.
Mm.